Some big war news today. Iran shot at and struck a U.S. F-35 stealth fighter. The damaged plane managed to land in the Gulf. Iran also fired a barrage of missiles at Israel's refinery in Haifa. At least one managed to hit the facility. We don't know what the damage is. Meanwhile, European leaders vowed to provide whatever help was appropriate to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. They and other countries want to get energy and fertilizer precursors flowing out of the Persian Gulf to save the global economy. I am Borzu Deragahi. This is the Badlands newsletter podcast, and I'm here today with, I'll let him introduce himself. Please go ahead.
Hey, good evening, Barzu. I'm here in the New York City area in the shadow of the Empire State Building. My friends call me Horsey, but my moniker on X is Iron Horsey 2000.
Great. Well, a pleasure meeting you. I guess this kind of discussion and talk about this discussion came about because I wrote something on X or Twitter about my experiences having been in the kind of inside machinery of the American kind of regime change industry and the industry wars. And I wrote something just warning people that, look, this may or may not make strategic sense for some countries, this war against Iran. But from my experience, my personal experience, nothing good comes out of these kinds of conflicts, at least for the people who are at the center of those conflicts. And I didn't mean for it to go viral. It was actually just born out of a discussion I was having with some other fellow former and current war correspondents who were like, wow, we're seeing this again, happening again. Iron Horsey here wanted to have a chat and talk with me about it. And I'm super delighted to do that.
Yeah, so I mean, you raised some interesting perspectives from both a historical level as well as more recent history. So I think, you can certainly frame an argument very well, going back to the French Revolution, right? So you could argue that a regime change of any kind is fraught with problems and is more likely than not to result in a negative outcome. And as you put it, both for the native population as well as for geopolitical implications. And I would actually be running uphill against that. So you have history on your side. And as we met really by chance, I've, been involved in a number of things, and some of my work has been involved in independent journalism against corruption of more local nature, but international studies has always been a big focus of mine since high school, actually, in the New York City area. And so I would say that while I'm going uphill, I would say that, we are in the 21st century and it presents a number of new factors that we've never seen before. I mean, we are familiar, and I'll just give one highlight, and then you can continue along the lines that you were discussing. So the one factor that I would add is while we have seen the nature of precision weapons involved in previous warfare, we've not seen it at this level. So the level that precision warfare is being applied here is rather unique. And what makes it unique is not just the precision of the weaponry, although an accident or accidents are still not eliminated, but the precision of the accuracy has led to a number of decapitated leaders from the Islamic Republic. And those decapitations, I think, in and of themselves have changed the game in terms of what modern warfare is. Drone technology obviously is another factor, and that's making its face known not just in the Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but clearly it's going to have be a factor. It has been a factor in recent incidents in both this year as well as, I guess you could say, it had a smaller footprint in the 12-day war last year. So with that, I think, we have a basis to discuss more along these lines of what a 21st century war looks like and how this may actually be different from previous engagements in the Middle East and beyond.
Well, I would just say that, in terms of the precision weapons, I agree with you that with the combination of satellite technology and the various types of electronic warfare tools that the Americans have and the Israelis have, there are great advances in precision technology, but that still didn't prevent the U.S. from, in the first hours of the conflict, hitting a school full of children and with not one, but two Tomahawk cruise missiles. And at that point, in my opinion, it's such it's a disaster. I mean, do you have kids?
I don't,
Yeah.
but
Well, I
since
mean,
you
like, I just want to say
allow
that,
me
like,
to say, I would challenge first and foremost, we don't really have any independent confirmation on this IRGC base that did add a school to it. I mean, we've heard that there was a school added to the IRGC base, but I have not seen any evidence, even from the Islamic Republic, on if this school was open that day. And I'm not denying the possibility that there was an incident there.
well,
Do
there was
you?
plenty of independent reporting, including, I mean, if you want to challenge the Washington Post and the New York Times and
Did they
other.
have a reporter in the location?
The Drop Site News managed to get a reporter there, but more importantly than that, they independently confirmed a lot of the video and the funerals and so on, and the footage that was coming from there. They talked to some of the victims and family of the victims. But I personally believe that whether or not you don't believe it, most Iranians believe it, even those who are
How
opposed
do you
to
know that
immigration.
though?
Excuse me?
How can you specify as to a society like the Islamic
Well, I've
Republic
worked
where,
in Iran and it's possible, and you can't hide deaths and you can't
yeah, but you're in
lie about
Istanbul now,
deaths.
correct?
Excuse me? Yes.
You're in Istanbul, correct? So I'm not challenging your previous reporting based on your experiences in the Islamic Republic. What I'm asking is, where's the independent confirmation? You mentioned one news site, you claim that they were there, you claim that others were at funerals, but that doesn't
Okay.
conclude, that's not conclusive evidence of anything other than some people were there and maybe they were
There were the
agreeing
graves and
to
pictures of
publish.
the there were the graves and pictures of the children.
I understand that there might be graves and pictures of all kinds, but were these reports done outside the purview and control of the Islamic Republic, Barzin?
No, I don't think so. But I think that, for
Okay.
example, the New York Times and Washington Post reports, there was actually apparently this school had a website or Facebook page or something like that that has been in existence for like a year or two. But
Hmm.
it doesn't even matter whether you believe it or not and you want to question
No,
it.
I'm not saying,
But okay, but
I
no,
said
but
I'm not
I'm just saying
concluding.
that at that point, within hours of the opening of the war, the U.S. and Israel lost any moral high ground. I'm telling you this, okay? In terms of the
No,
Iranian
you
people.
you can take that position. I'm not saying that you
Yeah.
can't. And
But I'm
I
just
would
saying, in
differ with
terms of the
that, but go
precision
ahead.
weapons, they've also hit hospitals. They've also struck near historical
What
sites.
hospitals have been hit?
I don't
I've
remember
not
the
heard.
names of them right now, but one of them is a maternity hospital on Gandhi Street in Tehran that I know of, that I've passed by when I used to live in
Okay.
Tehran.
So who is independently reporting on that outside of the Islamic censorship?
It's the I mean, what can you say? If
I
you want
haven't
to
even seen a
question every
report
single
on
thing,
it.
I would say the Iranian Red Crescent Society is a semi-independent organization that works with the International Committee of the Red Cross, and they are the rescue workers and so on. I mean, if you don't want to believe anything that comes out of there, if you want to basically believe the sanitized version of the war that,
No, I wasn't suggesting that. I was just merely
I
asking
don't
you
think
to
that the
provide
US is
some conclusive.
targeting hospitals
I'm
or
sorry?
schools. I don't think that the US, I actually do not believe that the US is
No, I'm
targeting
not saying you
hospitals or
can't
schools.
believe that. What I'm asking you for is independent corroboration, and it doesn't seem to be available just yet.
Well,
Maybe it will. Maybe it
I
will soon.
well, if you want to
But I
question
would
it on
also
that
differ
level,
with you on the conclusive nature of war. There's a big difference. And so let me, I know we didn't plan an agenda and we didn't certainly plan to get off on this footing on this particular issue about the first days of the war. Like, I respect your position that you think that this occurred. So I'm not challenging that. But what I am saying is, number one, there's no corroborative evidence that I've seen myself Now, that doesn't mean that I've seen all the conclusive information. Also, I would say that in warfare, accidents do occur, and it doesn't automatically mean if there was any of these incidents that you bring up that you say that occurred that I'm not familiar with, like with multiple hospitals. I think you mentioned at least two. Even if that occurred, that doesn't mean that there's, quote, a loss of the moral high ground in the war itself.
To the
Because,
people of the country,
well,
there
let me
is.
finish the thought real
Sure.
quick, Barzu, and then you can
Yeah.
continue. So the reason why I say that is there's a big difference between the targeting of civilians that we've seen from Putin's war in Ukraine, right? Intentional targeting of civilians for the direct application of terror, and also similar with the Islamic Republic, which I understand. I mean, not only are they using cluster munitions over cities, the West Bank, occupied or not, however you want to look at it. I mean, those are civilian areas that serve no military purpose. There's a big difference in that. And let's say, point to the fact that today I heard a 19-year-old wrestler in Iran. He protested peacefully. He was arrested and he was executed today. So they're targeting terror against not only external populations in the Gulf, Israel, but they're also targeting their own civilian population with terror. There's a big difference between that and like the IDF announcing that they're going to hit a location in Lebanon and for civilians to leave that area. And the US and Israel are not targeting civilians, would be, I think, in the fairest observation, there's no moral equivalence between
Well,
them
no
and the
one is talking
Islamic
about moral
Republic.
equivalence. And as a matter of fact, I didn't defend
Well,
the regime
I'm
at all.
mentioning it.
Okay. So, and also I would just say, the Islamic Republic is hardly a moral paragon in any sense. And it's, rightly internationally isolated, considered a rogue state for its behavior. So no one kind of is defending the Islamic Republic here. But I would also say
Okay.
on your point of precision strikes hitting leaders, I think it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the Iranian system. Okay, you decapitated Khamenei. The guy was an 86-year-old guy with prostate cancer. You killed Ali Larijani. If this is the way that you're thinking, if this, not you, but in general, if this is your path of warfare, if this is like, okay, we're going to take out this guy, we're going to take out this guy, we're going to take out this guy, it shows a complete fundamental misunderstanding of how the Islamic Republic works, the bureaucratized, systematized system by which it exercises control. And I've been saying this for years. And it's much more like it is much more like Stalin's Soviet Union than it is like the Saddam's Iraq. It is a system through and through. It is about control and total control. And decapitation strikes are in many ways, you did Iran a favor. They did Iran a favor by getting rid of Khamenei. They did the Islamic Republic a favor because he was sclerotic and unadventurous and not very creative when it came to strategizing and so on. So, congratulations. You got the younger, meaner, crazier version and his homeboys who are much more reckless and much more creative and much more willing to take risks. That's not how to defeat the Islamic Republic.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I've not really seen it. I've seen it mentioned, but I haven't seen it framed from that perspective. So that does give a different taste, I think. However, I don't think that we fully understand what the strategy is. I mean, it's very clear that the decapitation strategy from the initial day of the war was a success. And so people differ about whether that was appropriate, legal, or as you just offer, maybe even counterproductive, right? So, but we don't ultimately know how that fits into an overall strategy. And I can't say that I do know. So I can't accept your congratulations, unfortunately. While I appreciate them, and I would love to take some credit. I certainly can't do that because I had no forewarning, foreknowledge, or anything. Although I don't know if you watch any YouTube platforms of people. There's a gentleman. He's a former U.S. Ranger, Chuck Holton. He does a little YouTube show. I think it's called the Red Zone or the Holton Red Zone. Anyway, he had a show on the Friday before the attack, and it was a pretty much a discussion about like what is impending. And so I had made a little comment in the chat saying, I think the countdown has begun. Now, that didn't mean that I knew when the war might begin. But I do kind of feel that there was a countdown, and if I knew that it was going to be the next day, I might have put a small wager on that where the odds were largely in favor of not knowing. So, I mean, where we're at now is obviously, light years from that. And you announced some interesting news. So I had one question for you
Please.
before we, kind of go into some of the older history in the initial hours of the war. So my question is about that F-35. I heard that there was an F-35 that did suffer some damage and it did land. Do you know where that F-35 landed?
In the
Because I
Gulf,
haven't heard.
according to
I'm sorry.
CNN. According to CNN, it landed
No,
somewhere in
no,
the
I
Gulf.
was asking if you knew where the F-35 landed. So I
Right. So
heard that it landed.
somewhere in the, I mean, it landed safely without any damage, without any harm to the pilot, somewhere in the Gulf.
Okay.
That's according to
No, I was just
CNN.
curious if there was any more specific information on that particular
It was struck.
issue
It was
because
struck
it
in
came up
central
on,
Iran.
yeah, it came up. The reason why I asked was it came up on X. I think there was some Islamic Republic AI video that kind of like was trying to depict the F-35 as being picked off. And we know that it did land. And I was just curious if anybody knew exactly where the F-35 landed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's kind of interesting too, and that's another angle we can explore. And
Hmm.
as an American, I'll say this, that basically, just as Russia's idiotic invasion of Ukraine gave the US to bleed the opportunity to bleed an enemy by providing Ukrainians with intelligence and military support, at least at the beginning. Now it's mostly just signals intelligence and so on. This will give, I think, US adversaries, China and Russia, an opportunity to bleed the US, to bleed out the US by providing Iran with intelligence. And I think that, and I suspect, I don't know this for a fact, but all of a sudden we see these like cool new capabilities that Iran has, number of missile strikes, accuracy of missile strikes going up in the last few days. I wonder if that's Russian and potentially Chinese signals intelligence and satellite targeting support being provided because they're doing to us the same thing we did to them. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I don't really see I don't see the two as one and the same because the variables are quite different, right? So the United States uh, under the previous administration was providing a lot of direct aid to Ukraine's self-defense against Putin's invasion.
Yeah.
And here we have a different situation. We're kind of in a post-Venezuela world where the United States have pulled off a military operation that frankly, I don't think it's ever been done. I mean, I'm sure it was successfully done on the battlefield in many historical situations where armies clashed or similar situations like that. But I mean, to go in and I mean, you had Maduro literally barking out in a video several months earlier. And I mean, I saw the video and he spoke in Spanish and said, like, come and get me. Well, the United States accepted his invitation and they got him. And so that was like, I think, we hear less today about the pillars of the implications of what I've been calling for the last several years the Chi-Com Russia Molizid alliance. And so pretty much nobody talks about it within that context. And so I agree that there might be motivation both from Communist China and from the Kremlin to try to make the US bleed out. But I don't see that as being a successful strategy. In fact, in
Well,
recent
I
days,
mean,
maybe
isn't it a kind of historic strategy? Didn't we do
it
that to
can
the,
be. Yeah, let me speak to it though, because
sure.
I want to address your point. So the reason being is that I use the Venezuela framework. That's part A. Part B is both the military and the logistical aspects that support the United States in terms of their success right now. So, Putin is right now has tanks and he has army, his army loyalists in Moscow on the streets right now. Internet has been cut off, as you probably know. First, it was a part of Moscow. Now, I believe it's a wider net of Moscow. And that speaks to paranoia of what he's living under right now. And Ukraine has, I think, in recent weeks taken back about 400 square kilometers of land that was occupied by the Russian forces, he can't really provide much in the way of material aid, unlike Communist China, which I think was flying in cargo planes days leading into the conflict. And I think Communist China is, to your point, is the bigger contributor. But again, a report that I can't say that I've seen that's been confirmed anywhere. Maybe you've heard it, maybe not. So I'm not saying that this is absolutely accurate. Um, Reportedly, the Chinese air defense was being brought in to their newest air defense was brought in to aid Iran, and Iran basically utilized them, and they were all taken out, or mostly they were taken out on the first day. There's a rumor that there's repercussions that have been going on in Beijing as a result. They've even like targeted technicians and people that are involved in building these air defense systems for either like arrest or personal persecution. Again, I'm not saying that's the case, but it does show the level of frustration that's already existing, at least along the rumor mill about the failure of the communist Chinese war systems. Now, obviously, it doesn't end there, and I think you made a good point about the more like signals intelligence. I think Russia is providing that.
Yeah.
And they're providing probably a lot of targeting information. However, the question I have, and I'm not a military expert, so do the Russians have the ability to provide aid, technical aid to the Islamic Republic that
Like
they could
material
target an
support.
F-35?
You mean material support?
No, no, not a material support, a technical support. In other words, an F-35 enters into the war space, right? It's
Yeah.
flying. We don't know what the mission is or where it's going. We just know that it took some damage and eventually returned back somewhere and landed. Now, did the Russians have any role in that in terms of providing some kind of technical
Yeah.
capability?
No, I'm not
That's a
sure, but
question I don't have an
I just
answer for.
I just think that it's a curious data point that all of a sudden, after, the number of missile launches and the accuracy of those missile launches appeared to be going down in Iran, you see this little slight uptick in capability. And I wonder if it's someone coming to help. And my broader point wasn't just about this, but I think it's just a natural thing. I think, the the Chinese tried to bleed us out in Vietnam, and we tried to bleed the
Mhm.
Russians out in Afghanistan, and the Iranians
There's
tried
no
to
doubt
bleed
about
us out in
that.
Iraq. It's just part of
Right.
history. That's
Right.
what I would imagine that they would. They'd be like, "Oh, this is a great opportunity. Do not stop your enemy when he is making an error. Let him continue."
Well, I mean, I think your last point is the most valid, that if they think it's an error. But the problem is that Russia has now been suffering a series of global retrenchment for its allies, right? So it started in Syria. And
Sure.
clearly, Putin's war in Ukraine not only
Was a big
prevented
mistake,
Russia.
huge mistake.
Yeah, well, it's more than a mistake, but I would say that it's way beyond a mistake. It's pure barbarism, right? So if you speak to advocates, not to go off track, we'll circle back quickly, but if you look at the motivations, they're not very hidden. I mean, they accuse Zelensky of a lot of things. It's very distasteful to call a Jewish person a Nazi, but looking beyond that, I mean, their goals were very clear. They wanted to take the entire country. So Russia, Kremlin's goal was to basically occupy the second largest country in Europe. That was their objective. And they've been overtaken by events. So they were not able, and I think Turkey had a big role, and you could probably detail it far better than me. Turkey had a big role in upending the Syrian government under Assad. And Russia was completely unable. They tried to come in late from some of the reports I saw. They tried to stop the momentum late in that war, and they were not able to. So it speaks to their inability there. Venezuela is another big loss. That's kind of a dual loss, I think, for both the
Russia and
Chicoms
China.
and for the Kremlin.
Yeah.
So that's why I say that the framework has changed. And so historical, while I think everything you cited is completely accurate about Vietnam, Afghanistan, like all that is 100% on target. Um, the direction of where things are now is in a little bit of a different framework for those reasons.
Let me explain why I think that what the US and Israel have done, at least the US, for the US, is I think a catastrophic mistake. Because Iran is not an easy target, and the regime is not an easy target. And the Strait of Hormuz there's basically no military solution to opening there's no way of opening that Strait of Hormuz. And every single military planner, and I've been covering Iran and the
Mhm.
Gulf and so on for 20 something years, and every single US, and I've met with people at the Pentagon, I've met with people at think tanks in Washington, I've met with US military planners, every single, and this is what was so baffling about this move. Every single person that I've talked to is like, this is this problem, is that it's basically a choke point that a kid with a slingshot and a stick of dynamite can, essentially block off. This is the problem with this particular spot. In addition, as you've heard, I'm sure it's like a cliche at this point, Iran is kind of like a fortress. It's really hard for, a foreign power to come in and take it over. It would take a lot of troops. And as for the like local populace rising up and excuse me, hold on one second. I've got a little message here. As for the local populace rising up, I just don't see it happening. The regime still has its 20% supporters. That's quite kind of enough. And those people are hardcore. I've met those people. You know how there's like
Mhm.
people in the US who are like really they're soldiers and their whole life is about being
Oh, yeah,
military.
we have people like that. We call them Antifa.
No, no, but they're not Antifa.
I'm I'm making
They're
I'm
much more.
making a little bit of a joke, but go ahead.
The people that
And
I'm speaking of are more akin to like military families in South Carolina who've got like, family in the Marines and, they love, they love the armed forces. They worship the armed forces. Their whole life is about blood and soil and war and so on. There's a significant population like that in Iran. And they include the IRGC. They include the intelligence services. And those people are like extremely hard. It's not about Islam. It's not about the regime. Those people are hardcore nationalists. And that's the problem that you have to deal with. That is the hard reality. And I think that the Trump administration in this move did not take that into account. They were told or convinced themselves that you just get rid of Khamenei and the whole thing falls apart. What do you think of that?
yeah, I mean you're raising again a series of points, mostly that I would differ with because frankly the you have more experience with Pentagon and Pentagon officials, but my question to you, and I'd be interested because it was a question I had was, the military wargaming about the Strait has probably been going on for 40 years, right? So
47,
this is
yeah.
something,
I mean, and they
yeah,
fought this. They did this battles during the 80s. They had the
yeah,
tanker
yeah.
wars and so on. So they have that experience as well.
So the thing is, like, did they war game this recently, like in the last 18 to 24 months? Were those plans presented internally for discussion, or was there a short circuit in terms of a disbelief that the Straits would become an engagement zone for any number of reasons, right? So I've heard a little bit on both sides, but what I hear is too much of a, how do you call it? I would say maybe a little bit, this is no criticism towards you personally, but a lot of projection is going on, right? So we don't really know like the detailed plan of what they're going to do across Iran, like everybody, I think, is in agreement that a nation of 90 million people in a country as large as Iran is not going to see any kind of military engagement across the country with battalions and tanks. Like, that's way off the table. That's not a serious consideration. So early on, when we started to discuss some of this, I think that what I was saying is that we're looking at this from maybe the wrong prism historically. And the reason why I say that is there most definitely is a plan to take out the fanatical, like you call it 20%. For sake of argument, let me say it's 12%. But let's, even if we take a middle ground and say it's about 16%, is there a way to take out that 16%? So, for example, and I'm not saying that this will happen, but there is a series of both military and direct, more secular challenges to those people that can be made. What happens, for example, if their payment system is shut down and none of those people are paid anymore? Are they going to be as nationalistic, or are they going to be as fired up to quote fight to the death under those circumstances? And so in recent days, and we can continue point by point, but much of what we're doing is speculating on things that we don't have the full picture. So this in no way is a criticism of you, because you have a vast amount of personal experience, and frankly it's far greater than mine. So I'm only equipped to look at this from a more historical basis, and I would say that we don't have that full picture yet, but I am cognizant of a couple of things. Number one, the White House is not going to put those cards on the table. And number two, the IDF has publicly stated more than once that there are some surprises. Number three, I would point out there are reports, which I can't confirm, that the Basij have been getting targeted both by drones and on the ground, in sort of random attacks, and that some of them are refusing to report to their public postings. So, how these things break down, how quickly they can break down, I think is something that we just don't know if it's possible. Obviously, it's not going to be the 82nd Airborne in Tehran, you know, taking over the city of 8 million people. Or is it more? You may know better.
It's a little bit more, I think. I mean,
Okay.
it's maybe 10 million, but I don't think that that is going to happen. But I think that that could happen. That could, the escalation cycle could be such that, we'll be in a year instituting a draft to send, people over to Iran. If, for example, some big atrocity happens, 1,000 Marines land on Kark Island and half of them are slaughtered, and there's a big nationalistic fervor in the U.S., that could lead to an actual huge war, and that would be in the interests of who? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it would be the interest to turn
Yeah, I don't
Iran
see the
into a war
Marines
zone.
getting, if the Marines are ordered to take Karg Island, is what you were referring to?
Yeah, I'm just
Is
saying.
that what you were
I'm
referring
just
to?
saying for an
Yeah,
example, as an example.
they're not losing, and they're not going to suffer 50% losses. Trust me.
I was giving a sort of example of how the
I
escalation cycle
understand.
could
I
increase.
understand. I wanted you to understand
Yeah.
that.
Well, who knows? And I think that you and some of the more strident supporters of the conflict that I've seen, they have way too much confidence in the planning of this guy. I think that as shown, there's a lot of evidence showing that both the intelligence community and some members of the Pentagon and the military community were cut out of the decision-making process. And I think that it was kind of launched, and it does appear to many people, not just myself, and there is some insider reporting that the war was launched on a hope and a prayer, thinking that it would be over in a few days. Even Trump said that it was going to be over quickly, and that now they're basically making it up as they go along. Evidence for that includes
Yeah.
the constantly
Can I,
shifting rationales
is it
for
okay
the
if I
conflict.
challenge you on that?
Go ahead.
So I would say to your point that I noticed that a lot of people are quoting this framework about that the war would be just a few days or something along those lines. I've not seen anything that came out from the government saying that. Everything that I heard them was talking about somewhere about a 4 to 6 week timetable as being the possibility. And even they didn't agree to that. They said that 4 to 6 weeks was an objective, but they said that there was no exact timeline. So to me, and I'm going to not blame you for this, but I think it's very much a political thing. Um, it's sort of almost it's to the point of being political that it's almost a projection of what was Putin's 3 day war plan. That his KGB, FSB people came to him, said that in Ukraine they're going to welcome you. They don't like President Zelensky, and you'll capture the entire country in 3 days or thereabouts. And there is no equivalent to that I've heard from the White House or the Pentagon. And so if you have sourcing,
Nothing from the Pentagon like that. I think Trump himself said in the beginning it'll be over in a few days. We're
he
careful
didn't
about
say a
listening to
few
what
days,
Trump
I
says.
don't think. I think he said it was short, but we could be critical of him for many things in terms of statements contradicting his own statements. I mean, that's fair game if you want to go there, but I think that a lot of that is just really a PR issue in
Right,
terms
but
of
there,
his statements.
and there's also the kind of comments that he himself has made about we didn't know they were going to close the Strait of Hormuz. Again, it's Trump. He says stuff. It's not always serious.
So I think the criticism is actually more limited to an echo chamber of what's coming out politically. There seems to be this need by certain political quarters, and I've seen a number of people like, put this out on X, and I generally have been extremely critical of them for claiming that um, the whole confrontation was expected to be over. And I see no evidence of that because everything I've seen is talked about 4 to 6 weeks. But the Pentagon has been very clear. And I don't know if you've spoken to any sourcing that you might still have at the Pentagon
No,
recently.
not recently.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, I don't have any sourcing there, but what I hear from their public statements is they're making a very clear public position that there is no rigid timeline, which, obviously from a military standpoint, they shouldn't be saying that there's a deadline because that would work
Of
towards
course.
the advantage of the Islamic Republic. But people are very much intent on finding a way to kneecap people that they disagree with politically for whatever their motivation. So that was really my only point there.
I would say that we do have some data points that suggest that they are kind of, it's a war in search of a strategy and a plan. And that includes the sudden dispatch of the Marine Expeditionary Force, 2 weeks into it. And that includes the changing rationales for why the war was started in the first place, the unclear goals that the conflict has, including regime change, including dismantling the weapons, and then it became the Navy that Iran never really showed off about. It became degrading the missiles, then the nuclear program that Iran was apparently, according to some of the reporting, willing to give up. So I think that there is some and then it also includes the public statements that are kind of contradictory and all over the place. It's just they don't have their act together. And that is some of the those there are some data points that suggest that they are scrambling for a plan.
Yeah, I would differ with you on a number of points that you made there. So let's start with one that I think you actually made, which is the best and most valid one, which is about the Marine Expeditionary Force, which is on its way from Japan. And it's going to take, I think, about 2 weeks to arrive in the area. So I think they're about 72 hours into that right now. I think that's the actual, real, direct evidence that you could say this was not planned, right? So you can make that argument because you actually have something tangible. But a lot of these other elements, they're not tangible. And they lack that foundation. And again, it becomes one of political projection. And so you've been running in circles in media for a number of years, right? Like you have a long history in terms of your work history, you know, working with colleagues that are part of sort of a network of American, maybe foreign-based media, and they bring with them a whole set of biases. And when you guys start talking to each other, I think it's very easy. And I'm not accusing you of doing this intentional because, frankly, this conversation may be the best in terms of you seeing like both sides providing a wide open exchange of ideas. Too often people are getting into yelling matches on specifics that are not most of the time definitive, right? So let's say you and I wanted to have just a full-blown discussion, 30 minutes to an hour on the origins of this conflict and what was the plan. Like both of us could make arguments for about 30 minutes. And at the end of the day, we would both be speculating because we wouldn't be privy to what the discussions were between the United States and Israel and the Gulf states, even in the 4 weeks leading into the conflict, right? So we don't have that information. We don't really know what A, B, C, D plans there were. But I would say one thing, and I've said this to people online on X, which none of them really respond to, which is, you're not privy to the intelligence that they had and the decisions that were made within that intelligence. And yes, there has been a scattershot of information presented to the public. But if you listen to any CENTCOM hearing, all you need to do is listen to one of them. You
Oh,
get
I
it
do.
all
I've
laid out,
listened to
A, B,
plenty.
C, D. Huh?
I've listened to plenty. And
Okay,
I think
but
that
if
I
you
should.
listen to them, they clearly they lay out what their objectives are each and every time that I've listened to them. They talk about the attrition of, ballistic missiles, launchers, drones capability. So we're now, here's an interesting thing, and I think, we'll probably have another discussion at some point in the future where we can say, where are we in this? I've never seen a situation where the United States military is saying that they've basically accomplished 90% of their objectives in eroding the offensive capabilities of their opposition. And there's people talking about panic, no plan, and how do we get out of this? And I'm like, you guys don't know what the rest of the
Look,
plan is.
but look, I've been inside. You say that I'm in a bubble, and maybe I'm in
I
some of
said you
it.
might
But
be.
let me just say this, and you're gonna. I think you'll have to kind of agree with this. I'm not old enough to remember Vietnam, but I've read a lot of books about the Vietnam War, and I've
Mhm.
watched a lot of documentaries. I was a big kind of aficionado of that part of history. I was among the uh, kids in my school district who were the first ones who were allowed to start looking at the Vietnam War in history. It was a big controversial thing because I'm old enough so that it was very sensitive when they started teaching it in high school
Mhm.
in Illinois at that time. So I've always been an
What year?
aficionado.
What year was that?
I'm class of 87. But what I realized about that, and from my experience just being on the ground with the military in Iraq, I was like embedded so many times. I went to so many of those briefings. The US military lies. They lie their ass off. And especially at a time of conflict and war, and you cannot trust anything they say. And I'm so sorry, but I just remember sitting in these briefings where they would talk about how well the Iraqi insurgency was going, how the enemy is on the run. We've got our warthogs hitting them hard in the south of Balad, and they would go on and on and on about all these great successes they were having, and it was just like a lot of it was just pure bullshit. And they would give estimates of targets hit. Like, for example, we degraded 90% of the Iranian military. And it's
Mhm.
just bullshit. It's just, people up and down the line lying to their commanders, trying to make themselves look good. They've got their asses covered. But I've learned like really the hard way in many different instances, just not to take the word of the military at face value.
Yeah. So I don't want to get too caught up in the Iraqi conflict, but I will say this much. I think that war was won, and it was Barack Obama who actually he snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory because, as I recall it, General Petraeus and the people that came in with him when they called it the surge, they actually had come not to a military solution. They came to both a military and political solution, and things had quieted down. As I remember, there was an election. I'm using a external microphone.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so I apologize for that. So the reason why I went off a little bit on Iraq was I saw the outcome there not dissimilar to what occurred in Afghanistan, although I'm not paralleling 20 years in Afghanistan to the Iraq situation, but I think the Iraq situation could have found a different outcome, but Barack Obama had invested in a political situation where he said that we're going to
Well,
just
I'm not
basically
I'm not
boogie
talking I'm
out.
talking about 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm not even talking about Obama. And I'm just saying that like one of the things that I learned is not to trust what the military
No,
is
I
saying.
understand your points, but that's a point that we'll be able to revisit. You and I can revisit this and we can say, was that borne out? I have a different view on that, whether it's 88% erosion, 90%. I mean, I've seen some of the numbers, and I don't know if I was made this point to you. It was probably to somebody else. I was under the impression, and I wrote like maybe about 5 days ago, that I thought that Iraqi, not Iraqi, the Islamic Republic's missile launchers were under 100. And then I saw some Israeli information that said that they were more in the ballpark of like 150 or so. And they gave the number on the numbers that they had either knocked out or made or disabled. It was like probably around 250. So you could say like these numbers could be all wrong. And also you could say the US military is concluding 90% and they're wrong, or they're incorrect and wrong, or they're misleading, incorrect and wrong. You're fair to conclude on any of those particular points right now. But I think we'll know better where that actually stood. If CENTCOM is correct, like they're saying 90% today, and everybody's indicating that the last 10% is going to be more difficult. So in 3 weeks, we could say, were they fibbing? Were they wrong? Were they fibbing and wrong? Like those are all things that are on the table. So I can't discount your conclusion where you sit today because you might be right. Maybe we only hit 70%. That other 30% would be problematic.
What if they have factories building these in the mountains? That's another
It's a
possibility
it's a
too.
fair question,
And
but
there,
I
and,
mean,
and there was also
the,
reporting today from an Israeli source saying that further satellite intelligence and analysis of satellite data suggested that many of the launchers that they hit and targets that they hit were very good fakes and decoys. I'm not sure that that's accurate, but I'm just saying there's a lot of good
Mhm.
possibilities.
Yeah, those are all possibilities, but I mean, the United States, at least CENTCOM people, they're actually talking about factories and manufacturing sites as being hit. I've not heard that directly from the Israelis. So the IDF doesn't, they might be, but I don't speak Hebrew. So if they're talking about it, I'm certainly not hearing it. So that's an open question. If in fact, let's just say that you're correct, right? Let's say that they're inflating the numbers up the chain, sort of the military speak of, bad data going up the chain, and then, CENTCOM says, we're at 90%, Mr. President. We've stopped 90% of their missiles, their launchers, and their drone capabilities. Like, if that's wrong, then we're in for quite a problematic couple of months in the summer, possibly. But I'm not concluding that just yet. So I'm going to say you and I might revisit this question
And I
down
want
the
to make
road.
I want to make a broader point, just in general. Um, I just have, when it comes to Iraq, for example, my experience in Iraq, I was with the Kurds at the beginning of the war. I was
Mhm,
with the Peshmerga. They were super pro into it. By
mhm.
the time it was over, by the time I left 4 years later after my 4 year tour, and I went back afterward many times, but I didn't live there again. But I lived there basically for 4 years. By the time I left, the place was a nightmare. It was hell. It was, and
Where
every single
where
person,
in
including
where
those
in
Kurds.
Kurdistan?
I was in Erbil and I was in Soleimania, but I
Okay.
eventually wound up in Baghdad. But by the end
Okay.
of that 4 years, every single person that I knew around me, the Iraqis that I knew, or the people, the civilians, and so on, they were all basically cursing the whole adventure. Now it's a little bit different. Things have calmed down quite a bit, and it's now that the
Unless you're a Syrian Kurd, then it's not such a happy
no, I was talking
situation.
about Iraq there.
No, I know.
Yeah,
I just threw that. It was just
yeah.
a throw in.
In Libya, in 2011, I was also with the rebels. I was like really against. I took on I was in the bubble of the rebels as we were
Mhm.
moving in, and I went into Bab al-Azizia with the rebels on the back of one of their technicals. As they liberated Tripoli. And then I went back, and it was for a year. It was just one long celebration. And there was a lot of gratitude towards NATO and so on. I went back many, many times, and it just got worse and worse and worse and worse to the point where the country is in a sort of permanent state of civil war now. And every person that was with the rebels back then is basically cursing NATO, and all of them are pining for the days of Muammar Gaddafi, if you can believe it or not.
Yeah,
And I was
I
also
don't
with
disagree
the
with you there.
I was with the
I don't
Syrian.
disagree.
You what?
I don't disagree with
I
you.
was
I've
with the
never. I don't think that there was a basis for what was a sort of joint. Mostly, it looks to me. Tell me if I'm incorrect, but it seemed mostly to be a French U.S. decision to
And the
take
UAE as well.
Gaddafi out. Okay, but there was no real premise for it. I mean, like zero. If you there's people arguing about, and I'd love to talk more about it because, I see that guy, Senator John Ossoff, posing his questions yesterday, neglecting to see the dangers in 460 kilograms of enriched uranium that could be used for dirty bombs or nukes. I mean, he just skated over that, and in the media in the US, I know you're there, so you're reading international media too. I doubt very much anybody's bringing that up. Like they're acting as if that doesn't exist, that posed no threat whatsoever. And I'm like, has everybody like lost their ability to look back 72 hours or 14 days in this conflict? Like apparently politically that's what we do. And as far as Libya, like I agree with you 100%. It falls into the paradigm of how these things go wrong more often than not, back to the French Revolution.
This thing will go wrong as well, in my opinion. It will not bring anything good to the region. It will not bring anything decent. The U.S. military power used in this way, it just the way, even if the regime collapses, the Revolutionary Guard are going to be there. And it's just going to get worse for the people of Iran, for the people of the region, for Turkey. I mean, unless you're one among those psychopathic pro-Israel people who think, good, let it fall into civil war and
No,
just
I'm
go.
not. I'm not. Look, that's not the outcome I
No,
want.
no,
So
I didn't mean
please
you. I
don't
meant
project
one,
me to
unless
that.
I'm saying I didn't mean you personally. I meant unless one is among those people, and I've heard that voice too, saying, "Good,
Okay.
let it collapse."
Yeah,
Unless one
I
is
don't
among
hear those
those crowd,
voices.
huh?
I'm not hearing those. Those are voices I'm not hearing for whatever reason, and I don't
They,
claim that I'm hearing every voice.
but
So if there are voices that are talking that way, I mean that's from a very singular unilateral perspective. One that says rather than seeing my house bombed and my city and my country destroyed, if you guys are living in bad times, like okay. Like my faith and hope is actually for the Iranian people. And so the question I have for you, because when we met online, I said, and then you asked me about, format and stuff. You saw I was very open and flexible, right? And I said that I would ask you questions. So my question to you is, since you do have some regional background and experience both inside and outside of the Islamic Republic, is, what does occur if some of the things that we discussed here earlier about, direct payments being shut down, about the Basij becoming more entrenched with, randomized attacks both from above and below on the ground. Will the Iranian army at some point feel compelled to step in to try to gain stability?
I don't think that I think the Iranian army has completely, and I watched this happen over the course of 20 years. The Iranian army has been completely IRGC-ified. It has been
Hey,
completely put under the control of the IRGC. It is almost indistinguishable from the IRGC.
I definitely want to hear more of the
Sure.
detail on your perspective about the local Iranian military situation, because I don't know enough to conclude if the local Artesh are going to be in some position to take over from the IRGC. I know you don't think so, but I want to learn more about that. So
Sure.
hopefully we can reconvene. Send me an email. I really enjoyed talking with
Yeah,
you
me
today.
too.
It's
It's been a
been
pleasure.
a very positive discussion, which we need more of. So hopefully others will follow the example.
Sure.
And thank you very much for the invite.
Great. It's been a pleasure. Again, this is Borzu Deragahi. This is the Badlands podcast. Please subscribe. And if you want to help out and support independent journalism and discussions like this, consider becoming a paid subscriber. Thank you.